Salim, in this last series of videos talking about the post-election 43 back a couple of months ago, we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of historical ground, going back to the 1850s. And later, coming up to where we are today, which is, of course, hope for the West. We see an alienation of the West yet again, and their hope misplaced into an Andrew Scheer-led Conservative Party of Canada. And I don't even think it's an Andrew Scheer-led. It could almost be led by anybody, but the Conservative Party of Canada has failed the West and failed Blue Tories and failed Conservatives throughout the country, no matter what province they're in. And we see, of course, the rise of the People's Party of Canada. I won't call it a breakup of the Conservative Party. I'll call it whatever you want. Maxime Bernier left the Conservative Party to create the People's Party, and that's what I think that we should talk about now. The ineffectuality of an Andrew Scheer and Conservative Party, which is established elite again. We're back to square one like we were back in the 80s. The West still wanting in and still not being allowed in. Can you bring up can you continue the conversation from there with Andrew Scheer and his prospects for representing Canada as a whole?
Well, going back to the leadership after Stephen Harper stepped down, the 2017 leadership.
You were there, yes.
Pardon me?
You were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there. I supported Maxime Bernier through the leadership contest. Andrew Scheer was almost the last choice, but he was a choice that was just about in everybody else's list. And it took 12 rounds of voting for Andrew Scheer to come up, to finally have that face-off with Mr. Bernier. And on the 13th round, I believe it was the 13th round, that he won the leadership with a fraction of a vote over 50%. And that fraction of the vote was, as we now all know, with pretty much certainty, was that last-minute vote buying scheme that was done by Scheer and his people, people supporting him. The dairy farmers, the cartel in Quebec that came together and voted for Scheer to deny Maxime the leadership.
Wasn't there more ballots cast than there were actual members?
All of that is true because, or at least people feel that there is things that were done that was not proper, that was improper, because the ballots were, I believe, destroyed immediately after the announcement was made. There was no, and people wanted it to be scrutinized, but that never happened. So it was a situation in which Scheer came to the leadership, but not with an overwhelming support or with an overwhelming enthusiasm. There was none of that, that was behind Scheer. And anyhow, he was the leader. And as we moved closer towards the election, because we now have a fixed date election, so 2019 would be the election, as it came closer, and events were happening in Canada, SNC Lavalin affair was possibly the biggest issue that confronted the country, with other issues, the budget issue, the fiasco with China, arrest of people in China, and so on and so forth. Whole number of scandals and corruption. Mr. Scheer and the Conservative Party, it was believed, had a winning hand, and that they would return to power. And they didn't. On the contrary, the party crashed. The post-elections talking point became for the Conservative around Scheer that he increased the number of seats, as if he was going into the election to increase the number of seats from somewhere around about 94 seats, I believe, at the dissolution of the parliament, the 42nd parliament, to where where the Conservatives are now, 122 seats or something like that. So he lost, and the question is,
Totally.
and the people are going to keep looking at answers. That is a Conservative who want to still maintain the position of Scheer or go in for a review, is to convincingly and credibly explain why they lost the election. Okay, part of the argument during the campaign was that the making of the PPC is going to be vote splitting, and as a result, that will damage the possibility or the likelihood of the Conservative winning an outright majority of 170 seats. I maintain throughout this period that the Conservatives are not going to win 170 seats.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think we did a video with that in mind, saying that they were stuck at 32, 33% of the popular vote, even under the most damaging activities going around Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party.
Exactly.
They couldn't break through.
Exactly. So it hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. And now the possibility of the Conservative, in my view, ever forming a majority government is bleaker and bleakest. It's not going to happen. Maybe a coalition government on the right if PPC becomes a party that can win a substantive number of seats. And that's what we are looking forward to, the PPC. In this election, the PPC barely got 2% of the vote, or 300,000 voters across the country. We did not expect that Maxime would lose his seat, and he lost the seat. Now we know that there was a lot of shenanigans going on. The Conservatives were in fact more concerned about defeating Maxime Bernier than winning the government.
Smearing him with the epithet racist
that's
and
right.
things like that.
So,
Warren Kinsella, yeah.
But though we were disappointed, and I think most all PPC activists and candidates were disappointed with the result. But on the flip side, we have a result upon which to build. This is a pan-Canadian party that Maxime has put together, a party that addresses issues that the Conservative will not address and the Liberal will not address, because here comes up my main observation is, beginning with Harper, the Conservative Party is simply part of the establishment. I would say the establishment parties are the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the New Democratic Party, and the Green Party.
Yes.
They're all establishment parties. The differences are just minor differences on tactics and so on, but there are no substantive differences. I mean, you can pick up any key issue. Take, for instance, the UN Paris Accord. The Liberals are into carbon tax, and Scheer and the Conservatives are into subsidizing the green industry. What's the difference? It's about subsidizing is another form of taxation, you know. So they're all, neither of them are going to walk out or walk away from Paris Accord, repudiate the Paris Accord. PPC was the only party, you can't talk about the NDP and the Green, because for them it's whole hog, the Paris Accord. I mean, the world is going to end in 11 years for them. PPC was the only party taking just one issue, and we can run through all the other issues, said that we are going to walk away from the Paris Accord, we will unsign the Paris Accord, and we will leave it to the provinces to decide whether they want to go into carbon tax or how they want to deal with the Paris. We'll give it is a provincial jurisdiction. Environment is in the provincial jurisdiction, and let the provinces decide. You see, again, the balancing of the federal and the provinces. The federal government is not going to sign an accord and impose it on the provinces.
The history we talked about so far going up to this creation of the People's Party by Maxime had to do with the fact that the Conservative government has failed over the last 90 years to do anything to unite the country. There's always been alienation from the East and from the West to the Liberal elite, that is to Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. That's what the Liberal Party is, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. And you pointed out to me earlier today that Toronto, the number of seats in Toronto is more than the number of seats in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba put together.
Right.
So, and that's all Liberal. So we have the Liberals the urban elite in around the Laurentian River. And then you have the Conservatives, supposedly the hope for the West, the hope for the East, to try to have some sort of say in this federation. And they have failed miserably. They failed with every single attempt. It didn't matter whether it's Harper, the so-called bluest of Tories, and now Scheer. It's failed miserably to get rid of the likes of a Justin Trudeau. So I would posit that the creation of the People's Party under a Maxime Bernier type of person was almost inevitable. Something had to happen because the concerns from the West were never addressed. So what are the prospects now for Maxime and the People's Party? They're only a year old, and yet in that year they ran candidates, over 300 candidates, well, I forget the number, but 300 candidates from coast to coast, and I don't think that they had any representation though in PEI. But they still were talking about issues that Canadians wanted to talk about. All of the sacred cows were there to be talked about, and yet they couldn't break through the conservative-led smear tactics via Warren Kinsella that if you talk about immigration, you're a racist or a xenophobe. How are you going to break through that kind of slur to get the country behind this truly national party?
All of what you have said is true, Robert. And
there was a lot in there, I'm afraid.
And those are the challenges, you know. I mean, look, I mean, again, the PPC is a new party, and it was only a year old, barely a year old, when the campaign began. The writ was dropped and the election, and that was a very narrow 5 weeks window. So in 11 months before the writ was dropped, Bernier had the challenge to build this party and put it into some shape and some form, pull together activists, pull together supporters that who eventually came together. But we didn't have the financial resources. We didn't have the deep pocket donor support. We did not have the capacity because of the corporate media controlled by the establishment. In fact, the corporate mainstream media is the establishment media.
It's been paid off. It is. You can now say that anybody who's receiving these government funds
they had been bought over.
Are state media.
Yeah, but they had been bought over also with $600 million payment by Justin Trudeau. So we didn't have the media through which to get our message out, except find alternative means, which is what we tried to do through the social media and through word of mouth and the radio and so on. And what you have been doing, Robert, your contribution and Just Right Media was very instrumental, at least in our part of the world, in this southern Ontario. So we didn't have that, and so we couldn't get our message out, and we couldn't get enough people to know. I mean, people did not know. As I went knocking doors during the campaign, yes. People did not know about the PPC. People did not know who Maxime Bernier are. So the low information voters, which is, I would say, the majority, are not tuned into these things. You know, there are many other things that are happening where their interests are, and so we were in that sense fighting an election with both our hands tied behind our back, you know, handicap. But that's the challenge of a new party. The flip side of it is that we have sown the seeds. And this is right across the country, yes. The 300,000. This vote base of 300,000 is only going to grow, because here comes the critical point of where we go, what is going to happen down the road. First of all, the 43rd Parliament is a minority parliament. Justin Trudeau won, but he didn't get his majority. It could possibly be that we are back again in that cycle of election, what happened in 2004, 2006, 2008, that we might go to 2 or 3 more elections before, again, things shake down to a majority government. Very interesting little story that gives you the bigger picture of Canada in some sense. is the city of Milton, which is the western edge of the GTA. The border is Mississauga and Milton.
Yeah.
One seat, and it's a growing city, and the seat was being held by Lisa Wright, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party,
yeah.
right? And she was defeated by a Liberal in this election. What does that say? It says what I have called the browning of Ontario, the browning of Canada. The browning has already taken place in Toronto and Mississauga and Brampton, Vaughan, Markham, that is the GTA. That is, the new immigrants from South Asia, from the Middle East, is now marginally holding the balance of power. Which way the new immigrants vote, or for which party the new immigrants vote, that will be the party that will form the government. That's the browning of Canada. That is the marginal vote, which is this. Say if, old stock Canadians and immigrants before the centenary years, if they all divide between conservative and liberal, say, 50%, 50%, then the 10% that is going to make the difference, or say 45-45, and the 10% that will make the difference, who is going to hold the seat, then that 10% will come from the browning of Canada. That's the new immigrant.
Yeah.
That is going to decide what it is. And the results are staring at your face. That's what happened in Milton. That's what happened in the city of Toronto. That's what's happening in Vancouver, in Montreal, across the metropolitan center. Classical liberalism doesn't exist in Africa. It doesn't exist in the Middle East. It doesn't exist in South Asia.
But these people are running away from tyranny.
They're
a lot
running,
of them are. A lot of them are.
So you see, as you start getting denser into the analysis, you see there's potential for the people who are running away from tyranny, from dictatorship, to embrace a party or ideas that give emphasis to freedom, individual responsibility, limited government. So they are open to that idea. That idea has to be sold. But that idea is not being sold because the establishment elite over the past half century has gone the other way. The establishment elite wants to celebrate multiculturalism, not classical liberalism.
The joke is, and there is a bit of an irony or a joke, is that we talked in Gatineau at the first conference of the People's Party of Canada with so many people from across the country, and a lot of them were immigrants to Canada from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong today, you have people flying the American flag. They come to Canada and they can't believe how leftist we are here, how socialist we are here. They left that in communist China, they left that to go to Hong Kong and then come here, and now they're finding it again with Justin Trudeau. And so they're running for the People's Party.
So Justin Trudeau is in that sense, the end run of where his father began, multiculturalism. And when the multiculturalism policies and ideas were first mooted, was first presented in the late 60s and early 70s, and then the policy was run through the parliament and adopted in the parliament, the Progressive Conservative Party didn't oppose it. Robert Stanfield went along with it. And then it was Brian Mulroney who actually put the Statute of Multiculturalism, passed the Multiculturalism Act in the Parliament, which was later, then Pierre Trudeau had put that Section 27 in the Charter of Rights and Freedom about multiculturalism, but Mulroney came along and made it into an act, So, I mean, when you raise these questions, you have to go into deeper analysis, I would say, thicker analysis. So, yes, the potential of people, whether they are from Africa, Middle East, South Asia, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, or mainland China, they are potentially recruits who will celebrate or who will join parties that talk about individual rights, freedom, and limited. limited government, more initiative, more free market, etc., etc. provided they are given those opportunities
Exactly.
in the host country.
Yeah.
But in the last 50 years, it's just the opposite. I pointed this out in the parliament, in the hearing of the parliamentary committee, House of Commons Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, on
Senate,
the immigration issue, that people from the illiberal country, or numbers from the illiberal country coming into a liberal country, the numbers are going to overwhelm the liberal values. So multiculturalism is our value now. That is the value of the establishment elites in the universities, in the schools, in our businesses, in the official news broadcast, the CBC. I mean, look at the debate that happened, the leadership debate. Multiculturalism has been now even further degraded, if you might say it can be degraded, by genderism. And so you had, in the debate, the moderators were 5 women of color, white and non-white, women. No men were on the stage. So the incentive or the attraction is not there. That's where PPC comes in. So let's talk about that. PPC, what Maxime Bernier's achievement, whether completely conceptualized in his head or it is a thing in progress, but the seeds of PPC is, as the name of the party says, People's Party. That's people in opposition to the establishment elite.
Yeah.
People in opposition to the people who have run this country for the last 50 years, if not all of the 150 years. That is what you said, the Laurentian elite. That is, the people of Canada, particularly the people in the western provinces, are increasingly alienated from central Canada. You might say the seat of the unitary state in operation, and that's the dysfunctionality. And everything that PPC stands for and is articulating, by the way, all of PPC's critical position in policy terms are, as Maxime has talked about it himself, right out of the Blue Book of the Reform Party. So where did the Reform Party go? Reform Party was swallowed by the Conservative Party and the establishment elite when the merger took place and the Red Tories prevailed. And Mr. Harper simply became the instrument of the Red Tories. That is the establishment elite, the Laurentian elite of the past, and I would now call the establishment elite. Why didn't Mr. Harper walk away from the Paris Accord? Why didn't Mr. Harper say and take a stand against globalism? It was the PPC that took a stand against globalism. I spoke about globalism. Why did not Mr. Harper, when he came into power in 2006, he was confronted with the Toronto 18, the terrorist attack or planning to attack the parliament, which under Mr. Harper's government, the parliament was attacked eventually. Yes. The secular, sacred institution of our government, the sacred wall of the parliament was breached. The fact that the man did not get right inside the House of Commons to open up his gun, that the sergeant of arms was able to take him out.
They actually had to hide in the closet.
Yeah, exactly. So why didn't Mr. Harper focus on Islamism? Because neither of these topics, globalism, challenging the UN, and all of the things that matters, and Islamism, that is the ideology that is now threatened and has been threatening the Western world, all the world. It's only with the coming of Mr. Trump that it has been smashed. Yeah. But the idea is still there, and it can resurface and will resurface unless it is taken out, like communism. Why didn't Mr. Harper talk about it? Why didn't he confront this issue? People like me was there. I was there. They avoided us. They didn't want us around them. Only when they needed us. So both globalism and Islamism are issues that the establishment elite will not do, will not challenge.
Maxime will talk
Maxime talked about it. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have enough time to talk about it. So coming back to it, well, it is all wrapped up in this whole making of new Canada through multiculturalism and immigration. Immigration. There has been no discussion in the parliament on immigration going back to whenever you want to go back to. All the discussion about immigration is done right within first the cabinet, but as the centralization is taking place, is by the Prime Minister and the PMO and the bureaucrats.
It's quite an elephant in the room, isn't it?
Was that?
It's quite an elephant in the room. Nobody can talk about it.
The two elephants in the room. So take the immigration issue. There is no discussion. How do we decide the number? Where do we decide who will come in? How do we decide the mix between family, class, and independent? None of these have been openly discussed. There's no national conversation. A national conversation can only take place if this is discussed in the parliament, in a proper motion, in a proper debate. Nothing has happened. We were the only party, the PPC, Mr. Maxime Bernier. We put together, I engaged with Maxime Bernier on this issue, and we talked about the numbers. And we put a number there as a place, a standard from where to begin the discussion.
Sure.
We said between 100 and 150,000 will be our number of
Which, by the way, is the number of immigrants under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Would everybody have called him a racist?
But Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that number was also proportionate to the population. Remember,
that is true.
The population has grown, right? We have now reached almost 1% of the population, which is the highest in Western democracy.
It sounds small, but if you do the math, you'll find out that within a generation, you're basically replaced.
Absolutely. We are at 1% of the population that is our immigration policy at this moment, 350,000 people annually intake. And this will increase as the government wants to increase it, because it's right there, the numbers, the policy papers are staring at us. The globalists, that is the elite establishment, want the population number of Canada to rapidly increase by the end of the century, in their mind, to 100 million. Nobody has talked about this in Canada.
Yeah.
The monk-centered people in Toronto, they talk about Canada being, reaching 40, 50 million in the next 20 years. Have Canadian people been brought into this conversation? Has their opinion been, sought? So we put the numbers there. The number was not an arbitrary number, Robert, 100, 150,000, because we said Canada is a North American state. Our largest trading partner is the United States of America. Our closest ally in terms of security and all other relationship is the United States of America. American population is 10 times larger than Canadian population. American economy is more than 10 times larger than the Canadian economy in terms of GDP. American annual numbers of legal immigration is 1 million. 1 million is about 0.3% of American population. Ours is 1%. Mm-hmm. We said we should be proportionate. 1 million, we said, okay, 100 to 150,000. Let's have this discussion. We have documents, we have polling data showing, a polling done by Ledger in June of 2019, just before the election, showed that 63% of Canadians indicated we have too high an immigration. 63% said too high, less than 40% said we should increase the numbers. Okay. In Britain, the election that is going to happen, and it is about Brexit, one of the questions that was posed in this debate is about immigration. And only 7% of British voters believe that Britain should have more. Mm-hmm. 54% wants to bring down the immigration rate. This is the number one issue around the Western democracies, over the last decade. Well, What happened with the PPC putting just a number down? We were called anti-immigrants, anti-Muslim, all sorts of racial slur and smear was thrown at us.
Yes.
For simply saying that we need to have this discussion. I believe we will have that discussion. People now know that there is a party that is willing to talk about it, and we're going to raise this issue, So the PPC agenda or policy framework comes right out of Reform Party Blue Book. And so the issue that we were talking about before is about the federal-provincial relationship, right? And the remedy that or the West want in that the Reform Party in the Blue Book talked about was the Triple E Senate. Well, the PPC would be the one that would be, as a national party, most open to that proposition.
Would it be the fear of the so-called vote splitting in the West which prevented the West from voting PPC, or was it simply because they couldn't get through the mainstream media's rhetoric about PPC?
Well, I think all of that is at play, but the most important thing that I think was at play in this election for the 43rd Parliament, 2019 election, that particularly in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Saskatchewan, 14 seats in the Parliament, all 14 seats went to the Conservative. Mm-hmm. Alberta, 34 seats in the Parliament, 33 went to the Conservative. They elected 33 Conservative members, only one NDP. I don't know how that one NDP got elected.
Edmonton government town.
Yes, but 33 out of 34 Conservative, 14, 0 Conservative, In fact, between Ontario-Manitoba border and Alberta BC border, that is the Rocky Mountain, the prairie provinces, Liberals only elected 4 seats, but they didn't care. It didn't matter. They would still form the government. So I think in this election, the people in the West still believe the Conservative Party would fight for their interests, would represent them. It was their party in that sense that, it would be more open to Western demand. I hope, and I would maintain, that as more and more people in the West listen not only to the conversation we are having, but have these conversations among themselves, they will come to the awakening that this is delusionary. The Conservative Party is an establishment party. The only party, just as the Reform was, the only party in the national arena that truly represents the federation, not simply Alberta, but federal-provincial relation, would be the PPC. Yes. It is not an establishment party. It is, in fact, opposed to the establishment. And so the remedy, that is the critical remedy that we're talking about, rebalancing the federation, and how you rebalance it, we'll have to have that discussion, which never happened when the Conservative did form the government under Harper in 2006. 10 years, total wasted years. The wasted decade. The conversation needed to happen. The Prime Minister should be the driving force, or the leader at the center should be the driving force of that conversation, that we need to have a elected and equal Senate to represent the Federation, to rebalance it. And to do that, we have to bring proposition onto the table. We have to bring the premiers onto the table. And we have to go over this obstacle that is the amending formula. We have to confront that and convince the enough of the premiers or enough of the population base that the amending formula says 7 provinces or 50% of the population to amend the Constitution. We get that 50% or 7 provinces. We have the 4 provinces in the West. The critical province, if we get, is Ontario. We get it. That would make it 50% of the population. Amend the Constitution. The holdout provinces will be provinces like PEI, with the small provinces having a number of senators that is larger than what what it is, say, in the Western provinces. The Maritime provinces have, I believe, more senators or equal number of senators than all of the Western provinces. Whereas the shift in demography, population, and resources is in the West. And if you look at the equalization payment, it is the West that is providing the resources for the equalization payment, the money to the Maritime provinces and to Quebec. But the main, apart from the Maritime provinces, is Quebec. Quebec will be the obstacle. And our argument will have to be that Quebec has its own interest, which it defends it, and within the constitutional frame, whether it is language rights, 101, now Quebec has its own immigration policies. Quebec has been granted and given the right to elect its own Supreme Court judges, and has a representation Supreme. So other provinces have to be given the same rights or brought about that equity through an equal Senate,
Isn't it ironic that here we have Maxime Bernier, who's a lawyer,
yes,
a stone's throw from the Laurentian River,
exactly,
or the St. Lawrence River, in Quebec,
yes,
leading the charge to change all of that,
And that's nothing inconsistent. I mean, if you remember, Robert, I talked about this in that rally in Mississauga when Maxime unfolded or unveiled the immigration platform. I talked about Maxime as our generation Wilfrid Laurier, who is a Canadian, first, last, and always I am a Canadian. Mm-hmm. That was Wilfrid Laurier's signature. And Johnny MacDonald, the founding father. Maxime can well be the reincarnation, the Indian and me speaking, the reincarnation of Wilfrid Laurier, the man with the vision to once again rebalance and rework for the 21st century the Federation, where Pierre Trudeau patriated the Constitution and gave to the Constitution, added to the Constitution, to the BNA Act, the Charter of Rights and Freedom. It can be Maxime who could bring about through the amendment, the equal Senate that we desperately need in the 21st century, where the interests of the provinces will be articulated and protected. In a sense, a real two chambers,
yes,
which is what the Americans have, which is what we should. We can talk about our own numbers of how we're going to do that, but let that conversation begin.
So apparently the only way to let off the steam, the energy that we've seen with the creation of the Reform Party Canadian Alliance, the merger with the Conservative Party and PCs, and which has now been betrayed by the Conservatives and Andrew Scheer, is for the West and Ontarians, Quebecers, Nova Scotians, New Brunswickers, everybody to get behind, rally behind Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada, because it is the only party who wants to represent all regions of the country.
Our evolution took place. Our founding fathers evolved. The independence and sovereign Canada emerged, guided through and within the umbrella of the empire. That was a choice that was made by the founding fathers that served us well, that has given us a very peaceful transition, step by step as we evolved through, say, the Westminster Statute of the 1931, I believe it was, to the patriation of the Constitution, to where we are. We are a G7 country. The world does look up to us. We can be proud and we should be proud, but we need the people to define themselves who they are. We are not anti-Americans, or we are not NOT Americans. We are part and parcel of the North American complex. We share this continent with the greatest power on earth since Rome and the British Empire, the United States. This is not something to feel inferior to or negative about, to feel proud about it. Any other country in the world would like to sit on the 49th parallel where we are.
Absolutely right.
It is the establishment elite that has the problem, because they are mediocre, and they, through the political correctness and they, through their protection of their own interests, now this interest has been shifted towards globalism. I mean, this embracing of globalism at the cost of our national sovereignty, at the cost of our parliament and its independence, is where the rallying cry should take place, that we are opposed to what the establishment elite has been doing. This is a betrayal of Canada. This is the unmaking of Canada in the sense of diluting our national sovereignty, of who we are and how we decide. We have to control our borders. We have to control our foreign policy. We have to control our defense policy, our natural resources. We decide what is good for us, and not the United Nations, We will choose and select what aspect of the United Nations we want to support and what we don't want to be part of, okay? So that's where the PPC comes in, and thank God for that, thank God for the fact that Maxime took this step forward. But coming back to the constitutional framework, particularly for Western Canada, they have to wake up, they have to smell the coffee, that by parking their vote, just as Central Canada or Quebec have parked their vote with the Liberals, they are not doing anything for the Federation. The Federation has to be represented with the voices of the Federation, and the Parliament is where it has to go. So to retake back the Parliament, to make the Parliament responsive to the electorate. What has happened when we talk about unitary state, when we talk about decentralization of government? What has happened is we elect members to the Parliament. We could elect, a dog or a cat or a lamppost to the Parliament. They have been denuded of any role for which they're elected. That means they're elected to represent the people, the voice of the people, whether from Alberta, whether from Ontario, whether from PEI and each of the region, to represent them, and also to have that larger Canadian vision. But no, the vision only comes out of not the cabinet, not the parliamentary caucus of the ruling party, but the PMO, which is staffed by hand-picked people of the Prime Minister. Now, that was the same whether it is a Liberal Prime Minister or a Conservative Prime Minister. Mr. Mulroney did not change the situation. And Mr. Harper did not change the situation. They talked a lot when they were in the opposition. They did exactly what the Liberal Prime Ministers have been doing since Pierre Elliott Trudeau or Lester Pearson. Okay? So we have to break that. We have to make the Parliament responsive. The British Parliament is responsive. The British Prime Minister cannot do and undo anything that he wants. We have seen,
We've seen that recently, yeah.
Very much so. So that's the fight that has to take place. But it will be a fight, a struggle that will always be obstructed if we continue to maintain this flow, this open spigot of immigration and multiculturalism. The open flow of immigration into a multicultural society means that the new immigrant, have no attachment to Canada or Canada's vision. It is a multicultural vision. Anything goes. So Canada becomes just a hotel. And the establishment elite are tourists. They're more comfortable in this multicultural Canada where they can travel and enjoy the food, the dance, the music of the world that they enjoy, going to Paris, going to Shanghai, going to Hong Kong, going to Tokyo. Well, in their own home, this is what it is, And the gathering of this multicultural Canada is in the urban centers, divorced from the rest of Canada. I mean, what does the GTA and Toronto, the current GTA, care about what the problems are in Alberta? The very fact that this government of Justin Trudeau, from 2015 on to now and going forward, in chasing this unicorn of a policy to prevent the world from apocalypse in 10, 11 years' time through Paris Accord is out to suffocate and destroy the resource industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has no, you know, emotional attachment or questioning by the voters in Toronto or the voters in Montreal. They're pretty happy with the way the establishment elite is running the show, dispensing the money, blowing up the deficit, raising the debt to GDP ratio. We are almost approaching 100% of debt to GDP ratio. We're turning into a banana country, a third world country. It's not the collapse of the country, it is the financial situation that we are running into. You know, that is the dangers that we are facing. And as we go forward, you know, the more we get weaker in terms of our financial management of our economy, we are sliding more and more in the direction of the globalists.
Thank you, Salim.